Welcome. My name is Annelien Eriksen, and I'm the president of the Norwegian Academy of Science and Letters. Today, this morning, we ask, how can the Norwegian research and higher education sector best support our colleagues in Gaza? University World News reported in January this year that nearly 100,000 students have lost access to higher education in Gaza, and all universities have suffered serious military damage. The scholasticide and systematic destruction of higher education sector is not only a serious challenge for the population in Gaza, but also for the future of the Palestinian nation. However, in spite of physical infrastructure being destroyed, it has also been reported that one can see videos coming out from Gaza of a master thesis defense that is taking place, or students taking classes via mobile phones. Teaching is now organized remotely and in displacement camps. There seems to be a tremendous will to sustain education as a lifeline to the future. We often talk about higher education as the future. And of course it is, but in this context, these words gain another layer of meaning. Sustaining higher education is in a very literal sense the sustaining of the life of the young and the future of Palestine and Gaza. In the face of the enormous and devastating destructions of lives and the enormous suffering the last couple of years, it is our responsibility as part of a global university and higher education collective to take part in the work to maintain higher education for and with our colleagues in Gaza. The new and very fragile ceasefire and the new hope for peace also opens perhaps for a more concrete conversation about the need to rebuild. Our meeting today takes the call from the University Rectors of Gaza, published as an open letter in Al-Jazeera in July this year, as a point of departure. We will hear from one of them during this meeting, actually as the first speaker this morning. We have divided the morning in two sessions. One session where we hear voices from Gaza as well as experiences from Sudan. We will also hear from the Scottish Academy, a sister academy, and about their Gaza meeting. The second half, after a coffee break, we will center on efforts and initiatives from the Norwegian higher education and research sector. So, as I said, I will chair the session, and if time permits, I will allow for questions after each talk, but we might, and I suspect, be pressured on time. And if so, we might just move from one speaker to the next. But we do have time at the end of the program, hopefully before the coffee break and also before we end off before lunch. Let me now start by warmly welcoming today's first talk from our colleague in Gaza. It is my pleasure to give the floor digitally to Dr. Ahmed Abu Shaban, Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture and Veterinary Medicine at Al-Azhar University, Gaza, currently a visiting professor at the University of York, Canada. I will not read his full credentials, but I will mention that he has a postdoctorate in environmental sociology, University of Wisconsin-Madison, US, and a PhD in agricultural economics, magna cum laude, University of Hohenheim, Stuttgart, Germany. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your solidarity and for this important platform to talk about very important and timely issue in Palestine, which is about education, and maybe starting to talk about education in Palestine, we need maybe just to contextualize what's going on in Palestine. I mean, one of the main propaganda messages that Israel trying to promote that the history started on the 7th of October, and this is not real. I mean, scholasticide in the first time, or the first time terminology was actually brought to the academia was in 2008, 2009, when Professor Karman Napulsi was documenting a systematic targeting of education system. But even, I mean, she was like reporting something happening, but it is even long before. This is a conflict, a settler colonialism project that has started around 100 years ago with a very clear intention to expel Palestinian people out of their land, and through destruction and targeting all means of life. And for one of these main pillars of the Palestinian presence over their land is education. And I mean, when we talk about scholasticide, it is not something like only scholars are talking about it. Even UN in their reports are talking about it. And the long history of targeting Palestinian academic institutions and education system is very long. Even since 1948, we are facing this. And I mean, one example I usually use is my my experience. I mean, I started my academic journey as undergrad in the same faculty which I'm leading right now, and that was 32 years ago. And during those 32 years ago, my faculty building was destroyed 3 times. And also it was rebuilt 3 times. So we were actually targeted not only by repeatedly, I mean, like violence of the Israelis, destruction of our facilities, but also through different policies like siege and its implication on the whole life in Palestinian territories, affecting even our education facilities and capacities, mobility of our, I mean, scholars and students. So, I mean, systematic targeting of higher education and education in general has a long history in Palestine. But what is really happening right now, they are shifting from targeting and systematically targeting and challenging our education system into annihilation of the total, I mean, like the total destruction. I mean, what they did during this genocide, I mean, they, as if, you know, they have a very clear message, you know, we have been trying to kill those Palestinians, but they never die. Every time we destroy the building, they rebuild the building and they start again. Now we are going to destroy it once and for all. So it is kind of a systematic destruction and attempt to total annihilate of higher education in Gaza. So we are talking about several rounds of destruction, but this is the most massive one. I mean, like 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021. But in 2023, it was really very systematic. So soldiers are coming inside the campus. They destroy one building after the other, and then till they finish and all buildings within a campus before they leave to another campus. I mean, but the good news, you know, that the Palestinians actually show a very good resilience model. So even after all what's going on, we started again. And now, you know, like, I don't know if you have seen even a very beautiful photos of our new students nowadays, because finally the Ministry of Higher Education could actually arrange for high school general certificate exams. So we got the results, and we have thousands of new students coming to register in the academic institutions in Gaza nowadays. So, I mean, I would like to show some photos here of the destruction, but this is part of the destruction. Here is one of the buildings in the Islamic University. Here again, another building in the Islamic University. And this is the Islamic University Students Building. But this is really interesting one because the Israelis, through their propaganda, they just claim, it is a hot battle area, and those are actually necessity of a battle to destroy the buildings. As you see here, those are Israeli soldiers proud of installing their mines in the building of my university, the new campus. And actually, this particular building is the building where I have my office. And as you see, it is a hot battle area. Well, actually, they are laughing, making jokes, and filming and posting in social media, proud of what they are doing. So it is very clear that they are not fighting there. They are just coming with a very clear mission to destroy our academic institutions. And this is the result. After they just completed destruction and burning all buildings in the new campus at Al-Azhar University, Gaza, they posted this on their social media, proud of what they did. And excuse the language, it is their actually language. So this is what they wrote. Let's go. We're finally done with this shit. And this is the result. This is the building where I had my office. And this is, by the way, this is actually shortly before the ceasefire. They came even to this destroyed building and just completed the mission. So the building is not standing anymore. They destroyed it completely. So here is Al-Aqsa University. Here is Al-Quds University. Here is the Al-Isra University. But again, I mean, as I said, but as a Palestinian, we just think that education is our identity. Education is the Palestinian symbol of Palestinian identity because it is also it reflects the Palestinian collective knowledge and culture. We are producing the Palestinian engineers, the Palestinian doctors, the Palestinian teachers. We reflect the Palestinian identity over this land. And for this, actually giving up is not part of our even choices. So we resumed online education. Now we are starting the 5th semester soon. Actually, next week we are starting the 5th semesters. We have even our graduate students, as you see in the photo, they are just defending their thesis inside tents, and we are still there. And that was even a clear message, was even early May in 2024, when actually we just saw the attempt not only to destroy our building, but to destroy our institutions. And we thought, no, our institutions are still there because we believe in institutions, academic institutions, universities are not buildings. It's about communities. When you have professors there, when you have students there, the academic institutions will be sustained. And again, another statement in 2025 by the presidents of universities that actually asking the international academic institutions to partner with Palestinian academic institutions to support their existence against the Israeli evil agenda to destroy our education system. So, and this is really a very important message because this is a message for the international community that we should work together, not only because I mean, it's not a normal war. It is a genocide. It is an attempt to expel the Palestinian out of their land and destroy even education system. And all academic institutions all over the world should stand for the right of education because this is actually integral value of all academic institutions. They should protect this right and stand against any attempt to violate this right, regardless even of even political stance. So this is something like related to if universities will not stand to protect education right, who's going to stand for that right? I mean, also I would like to show, I mean, very important like initiatives to support academic institutions In Gaza, we established in June 2024 Emergency Committee of Gaza Universities, which is kind of initiative to reflect a unified sector voice from the main three universities in Gaza, which is non-for-profit universities, reflecting actually the priorities of those universities or academic institutions in Gaza, with a very clear message that supporting higher education in Gaza should go through institutions, not through individuals. Because not all initiatives provided to support academic institutions in Gaza would mean that these are good, even if they are well-intentioned. So they could actually be harmful to the resilience of the academic institutions in Gaza. We need to think how to cooperate with the institutions to support their resilience on the ground of Gaza. We have ISNAD program, which is a scholarship fund that is because our main income for Gaza University is coming from student fees, and because of the war, we cannot actually ask the students to pay the fees. So we had this initiative from Welfare Association, which is international, well-known NGO, and they established this SNAD program to raise fund for covering the fees for students in Gaza University. We have several virtual fellowship programs to conduct joint research between researchers in international academic institutions and Gaza academic institutions. This is even really a very important initiative because we believe research in Gaza right now is needed urgently for mainly two reasons. One reason, in all disciplines, I mean, health, education, environment, food, sociology, economy, even legal or, I mean, law-related research, we need it actually to reflect the atrocities and war crimes committed on the ground and record them. We need to record. We need actually to reflect the voice of voiceless victims and report them and record and document them through acknowledged research. But also it's very important for another reason, that we need to reflect the Palestinian narratives about how the Palestinian would like to see their Gaza rebuilt. We don't need actually Trump to decide to build a new Rivera in Gaza. We need actually Palestinian in Gaza to tell their narrative. And this is very important, is actually, and I think it is ethical. We need actually to reflect this through our research, how the Palestinian would like to see their education system rebuilt, their health system rebuilt, their environment rebuilt. So this is very important to tell the Palestinian narrative. So there were like several virtual fellowships program where we can actually just have the cooperation between academic institutions in the West and academic institutions in Gaza. It's also very important initiative that even not only the Palestinian side is organized to reflect priorities, but also the international community, academic community side also is organized. A very important initiative is the NORBAL Consortium in Norway. A similar attempt actually is also in United Kingdom to achieve a coordinated international solidarity towards organizing efforts and collective action to provide the needed support to the academic institutions. Friends of Palestinian University Association, which is a very important charity that also trying to organize the needed collaboration and coordination with academic institutions in United Kingdom, but also even beyond. And of course, we have like several attempts to support our ongoing activities on the ground, like online teaching. Also, we are trying to see even supporting of our students in different means, providing them with resources and trying to support even sometimes with needed capacities on the ground, like providing some virtual laboratories and other needed resources for online education. I mean, what is needed, or how you can help? I think the main principle we need, I mean, we have like several initiatives, and all of them are successful. But the main principle we need to think about working with academic institutions, not to bypass them. This is very important concept because it is very clear attempt they would like to destroy the academic institutions on the ground. And what we really need, we need to keep those institutions working and to give this hope for our students and for our people that we are still there on the ground, we are still operating, and we don't need actually to see our students, our professors leaving. We need actually them to stay on the ground and to support this sustainable process and resilience of academic institutions. Calls to action, I mean, we can just talk about scholarship and staff support, like sustained students and displaced faculty, maybe through virtual fellowship, through providing even funds for tuition fees for students inside Gaza, supporting their research on the ground, institutional cooperation like co-teaching, joint research, online mobility, digital infrastructure, strengthening distance learning, and open resources like library. Advocacy is very important because we need actually to challenge the biased propaganda made by the Israelis and to support, to reflect actually the context and the background of this battle. So this is not a normal war. This is a genocide. This is a scholasticide. This is an attempt to annihilate all means of life for Palestinians over their land. But it's very important to say that with this even fragile ceasefire, we need to start thinking about rebuilding. I mean, so far we were just only asking for support to sustain our ongoing online teaching. But what we really need to think about right now, we need to think about how to rebuild, rehabilitate our academic institutions and to stand against the new project of building a new Gaza with the new institutions to substitute our national institutions. Our national institutions is our national identity. With your support, we need actually to support this national identity over the land of Gaza. I really appreciate your support and looking forward future cooperation to support the resilience of our education system. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shaban, for a very concrete call on how to rebuild and how we can contribute to rebuild higher education in Gaza. I think we have to move on to the next speaker on the program now, but we will have some time for reflections from the audience before the coffee break. And it is now my pleasure to give the floor to Dr. Ahmed Abu Shaban, who is currently working at the Department of Education at the University of Oslo. She's there as a Scholars at Risk, on the Scholars at Risk program, and she's from the University College of Applied Sciences, Gaza. She's also a member of the Global Young Academy, and she holds a PhD in educational management from Yogyakarta State University, Indonesia. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and it's very nice to be here between you. For me, I'm not going to repeat what Dr. Shaban talked about, because today I'm more reflecting about things related to personal aspects of being a researcher from Gaza, coming here to Norway. I still have technical problem. It's okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, today I'm presenting things related to my personal experience. Today I'm not talking as a Palestinian. I'm also representing all researchers of Gaza. Because me, myself, I lived 7 months during the war, so I'm reflecting my personal perspective. And one day, you get up as a normal person, getting ready to go to your work, to help people, to rebuild minds, and to create new opportunities in a place where all the challenges were persistent for years and years. We will try to help all of the new generation, despite all of the challenges, to create new hopes every day, despite all of the struggles that they have witnessed, not only before the 7th of October, we are talking about years and years before. When you have your own career and you have your own life, and then you find yourself in a stage that you need to start all over again. For me, this picture is not like a picture of color of a beautiful building. It's a place that I have joined since 2004. I know the walls. I know all the bricks. I know the people. I joined the academia in 2004 as a teacher, and I spent my entire life working with very creative colleagues to create new opportunities. And then you find yourself in a stage that you lost everything. And the joyful of colors that we witnessed with the beautiful spirits between the buildings, it turned to be ruined into ruins. And the beautiful joy of colors, it changed into black and white and only ripples. For me, these walls are not just a place. It's a history. There are beautiful memories and lots of people we know between these walls. And then you find yourself in a tent. This is me after 7 months in the war, after 5 displacement, lost my home, lost lots of beautiful people that were surrounding my entire family. And you find yourself in a stage that you need to start all over again and to think deeply about how you are going just to protect yourself and to provide the basics of life to your parents. I mean food, I mean water. But I remember being a researcher and having these responsibilities that I have aspired my entire life, that despite adversity, you need to work, and we need to keep working to sustain education. And while I was in the tent, I was thinking with other colleagues to protect education and to present and to highlight this unprecedented experience. And that's encouraged me while I was in Gaza, in Rafah, before coming here to Norway, in depicting this knowledge in a form of research. This is not only me as Asma. I know that lots of researchers in Gaza were like me, struggling just to open their laptops or to secure like 1 hour electricity generated by solar energy after walking 3 or 4 hours to find a piece of bread. But in the same time, I was thinking, should be depicted. The whole world should understand this. And that's why I wrote a paper while I was in Rafah. It's about brain drain or brain circulation, depicting the status of academic scholars and researchers who were forced to displace many times during the war. And when I have done this research, 7 months when this war started, we have reached very unexpected results related to the status quo of the researchers during the war concerning the unemployment and economic hardships. Most of the academics found themselves in a stage that they don't have work. They have to provide their basics of life without having any kind of money. They have financial constraints. They have consideration of migration, and they have psychological burdens, as well as shifting the career. And when I'm talking about career shifting, I'm talking about professors found themselves in a stage that they need to secure their basic needs by selling foods to others. And again, lots of challenges. And if you can understand this challenge, because it was unprecedented in terms of Gaza war, we are talking about the challenges faced the academics and staff who were displaced many times during the war. They considered like personal safety concerns, psychological impact, communication barriers with the loss of internet and electricity, as well as economic hardship, basic necessities shortage in terms of water and food, also employment insecurity, and of course, mobility restrictions. And all of these challenges in higher education, people were putting some perspectives about how do they see this period, of course, after the post-war. And again, this was a very critical stage at the beginning of the start of the war. So most of the people were clarifying the challenges in achieving normalcy. They were prevailing uncertainty and erosion of trust, lack of trust. And lack of trust was a very huge topic because we had to make decisions under uncertainty, where lots of people were asked to go to safe places and ending them to be targeted in these what's so-called safe places. And of course, necessity for higher education reform, education discontinuity and de-development, and the worst scenario and the worst nightmare is the brain drain and intellectual power loss. I'm reflecting this experience, but I realize that lots of researchers in Gaza with different fields will share the same thoughts that I have, that I need to depict this knowledge, unprecedented experience, to document it on paper and to publish it, and put our own perspective about the horizon and the future in the post-war period in Gaza, and talk about education with all educational levels. I mean higher education, I mean basic education. In the 22nd of this month, in October, the Euromed Human Rights, they published this article, and it was having this curious title, very interesting title, that no one fully survived the 2-year of genocidal act in Gaza. And if you go through all of the numbers, they are tragically devastating numbers. And what I'm more concerned about, the huge numbers of people who were injured or killed, or maybe for me, because I'm more interested in the umbrella of the academia, we are talking about 95% of the academic institutions as well as schools were leveled to the ground, giving an opportunity or giving like a huge concern of reconstruction that will take long and longer time than ever expected. And when I'm talking about Gaza higher education landscape, as Dr. Abu Shaban stated, that here in Gaza we have more than 17 universities accredited from the Ministry of Higher Education, ranging from university college, traditional universities, as well community college. Most of these universities were leveled to the ground, leaving more than 90,000 students with a place that they don't have a place to study in a regular basis. And what I'm more concerned from a scientific and a researcher perspective, I'm talking about the systematic destruction of these higher education institutions during the war. And the most tragic things is the loss of intellectual power represented by academic staff, professors, as well as rectors. Me, myself, in my university, we lost the president of our university, Dr. Said Zib, at early stage of the war. Dr. Said is not the only person who was targeted. We are talking about researchers who has like a huge, prestigious publication efforts, not only in Gaza, but also in the international world. But I'm also talking about the daily life of a researcher in Gaza. This is a picture, it went viral through the internet and Instagram of Professor Ghannam. He's a professor in law from Gaza, and he was holding bottles just to try to find a place in long queues like a daily basis, just to secure his family in terms of water and drinking water. Can you expect or eyewitness the transition of academic situation for a person who has like a long history of depicting all of the knowledge, and to find yourself in a day or another in a status just you need to secure the basics and daily life? So most of the researchers witnessed problems in access to electricity, internet, labs, and libraries. We have safety issues related to bombing and blockage and trauma. Also working under embargo, like journals and conferences. We don't have access to these as we used before. And of course, balancing survival with academic commitment. And most tragically things is the academic isolation. And when I'm talking about academic isolation, I'm talking about difficulty in publishing and collaborating internationally. I'm talking also about barriers to mobility in terms of permits and borders. Since the 17th of April 2024, the borders in Gaza are closed. I was fortunate to live only 4 or 5 days before the borders were closed, and I was able to publish my research only when I just left Gaza. Also, I'm talking about psychological tolls of constant uncertainty. Why is it important for us as a researcher to think of that, and why we need to borrow your minds to think with us? Because conflict affects not only lives, but also knowledge, production, continuity, and the future of opportunities. Because we still, with a ceasefire, we still have these challenges. We have still infrastructure and resources we have limited. Because I talked with the people of Gaza, nothing changed on the ground so far. When they just stir around, it's only rubble, it's only destruction. They don't even have the ability to move or to transport because, again, they don't have all of the equipment and the tools that can help them to remove the rubble so far. They have also problems in terms of digital readiness and e-learning capacity, as well as staff development and research continuity. And of course, we are dealing with the students, and students' well-being and psychological support is something critical on the stake. Since I arrived to Oslo 17th of May, Satna Mai, it's a very, memorable day, I tried to do my effort to speak about it. Part of me feeling like the responsibility and try to depict this extraordinary experience, talking to lots of conferences, presenting my thoughts, planting seeds. And luckily, these seeds was the plant seeds for the Nobel and the Norwegian Consortium, which I'm so grateful to. But when people ask me about it, and I remember I received many and many questions, is it necessary, Asma, to talk about education in this time? Is it like a necessity and is it a need? I keep telling them that for Gaza, it's like something more important because education all of the time is a right, not a privilege. And for the whole time, for the education, for the students as well, the academic staff, education was a lifeline. It was a term and it was a symbol of our identity. And because research institutions and documenting what we have witnessed is a kind of resistance during the war, and we also to shed lights, and we need to shed lights on the community-based learning and psychological support. People ask me about what do you actually need. We need to give the floor to Palestinians to secure their needs and to fix their challenges, because there always have been challenges for us. And we used to have innovative solutions to secure all of the solutions. But in the same time, we found ourselves now in a position that we need to create opportunities for these researchers to find solutions in terms of, funding projects, opening calls for the Gazans to secure their challenges in terms of solutions. And why? Because we have the contextual knowledge shaped by the life and experience, as Dr. Ahmed stated many times, of many wars, many experiences. Maybe the war after the 7th of October, it was unprecedented, but again, we are able, because we know the language and we are more familiar with the context in order to depict this experience in a good way. Also, we have innovation under constraints in terms of creativity and necessity, as well as a sense of responsibility towards community and justice, and of course, insights to global academic freedom and peace building. What encouraged us to do that amid adversity? Of course, our students. When you hear remarkable stories about students walking 2 or 3 hours just to have an internet signal amid the bombing and the challenges, or to secure 2 or 3 hours in their daily life just to have education it means a lot for us and encourage us to find more solutions. We have lots of students who are applying the exams in unhuman, unnormal conditions, and we need to secure all of the best that we can do in terms of research. And that's why most of the academic institutions, despite being level to the ground, now we are starting the 4th semester. It's not easy as it is, but this is the only thing that we can offer to our students, to give them hope, to think how to live, not how to die. I'm presenting one of these stories.
أنا طالبة من طالبات البكالوريوس، بدرس تجارة وإدارة مكاتب. انقطعنا سنة كاملة عن التعليم. رجع التعليم رجع بصعوبة كبيرة، رجع بمعاناة كبيرة، خصوصاً إنه إحنا في حرب في قطاع غزة. ما في كهرباء ولا إنترنت. إحنا كتير بنعاني إني أنا أطلع أشحن جوالي أو ألاقي كهرباء، إنه الشمس ما بتكون كل يوم طالعة، خاصة إنه إحنا في فصل الشتاء. بطلع على مسافة بعيدة على الأقدام علشان إني أوفر كهرباء أشحن الموبايل أو اللابتوب. أحاول إني أتبع بشكل يومي محاضراتي، ما في مجال كتير، خاصة إنه إحنا بنطلع في حر الشمس أو إحنا بنطلع في منخفضات تحت المطر، نمشي مسافة كبيرة على الأقدام. رغم هيك إحنا مكملين، إحنا بنحب العلم والتعليم، خصوصاً إنه إحنا في قطاع غزة. إن شاء الله يا رب نكمل تعليمنا والله يوفقنا جميعاً.
This is our students. These are the new hope for our generation. We know that these students who are the people who are going to construct and build and be our future. And that's why it's not like a choice to be resilient. We are born to be resilient in Gaza. And that's why we need to create more opportunities. And these opportunities should not wait. They need to be as fast as possible. We tried to create lots of spaces in Gaza. We were lucky to have some support from different institutions, even here in Norway, like the Norwegian Student and Academic Assistant Fund. We are thankful for them that they created different spaces for my university, and now we have students who are actually studying in Gaza. We need to center the Palestinian researchers and knowledge procedures, and this is a must, and this is part of my perspective as a researcher from Gaza. Give a poise to the Palestinian and academics and scientists and professionals who have, for example, the first stand of experience in terms of destruction, and feature Palestinian-led research and testimonies rather than relying solely on the Western institutions or international organizations' point of view. We need to report on the war and knowledge of education and frame the attacks on universities and school and research centers as intellectual genocide, not just as collateral damage. We need to think of all levels of education. Yeah, I'm working under the umbrella of higher education, but I'm so concerned about the broken chain of education where we have like children for the second year, they don't have access to kindergarten or school, or studying in unhuman conditions where they have no access to chairs or desks or books or notebooks, as you can see, and these pictures are stated from the UNRWA. We need also to talk about more interesting topics that were depicted through the war in terms of mass destruction, forced displacement, targeting the medical and educational professionals, and of course, suppression of Palestinian narratives and knowledge and destruction, and of course, which is most importantly for me right now, is the status within the ceasefire. You need to use the science and public health to document the war crimes. We have like closing most of the medical institutions, including the hospitals in Gaza. We have lots of doctors who are still detained inside the Israeli prisons. Lots of questions, and these need to be depicted also. We need to advocate the future of science in Gaza in terms of cover the efforts of rebuild higher education institution and research despite the high destruction. And most importantly, don't stop talking about Gaza. It's not ending with a ceasefire. The situation in Gaza is still critical, and what is awaiting the people in Gaza and more wars of survival. That's why we need to keep going the international conferences for Palestine to raise more awareness in terms of gathering creative solution and create lots of spaces of hope as we created with SIEHO in terms of Norleys. And I remember in my institution, we named this a space of hope Norleys because it represents the light that we received from Norway. And it happens that the word Nur in Arabic means light. So keep shedding the light for the people in Gaza. They don't have electricity. And of course, hosting more servers and servers and data for learning management system. Most of the universities have lost their servers. In my university, we struggled for more than 4 or 5 months to secure new servers in order to protect the students' data and information, and it was a great struggle. Also, we need to open shared resources for students and academics in terms of opening the journals and shared journals for most of the academics in terms of publishing and opportunities, and of course, joint research and collaboration related to crisis and specific topics. And you will find lots of people sharing the same thoughts with me that during the war that we have witnessed unimaginable situation. And most of the people, we used to have this normal life, we used to have normal solutions, but now even for some students, we have very critical challenges in terms of depicting the graduation projects for students inside Gaza, where are no firms, no companies, no schools for them to be practitioners or to do their internships inside Gaza. And that's why I was talking to lots of institutions about thinking with us more creatively how to secure these problems in terms of virtual education and reality. We need to focus more on the impact of conflict on the civil society and the human security in Gaza. We need also to shed light on the post-conflict reconstruction and the development and planning. And why does it matter? Why does it matter? I remember when I joined the academia, I wanted to devote all of my efforts to help the people and to secure freedom and peace worldwide, not to secure bombing other people elsewhere in the world with bombs. So we need just to collaborate our efforts as universities in order to sustain and protect the academic freedom. Why? Because strengthening the resilience of higher education institutions is not only benefits the academic community, but also supports broader social stability by ensuring that educational disruptions are minimized and students continue to receive quality education despite adverse circumstances. I talk today as being a researcher in Gaza. It means holding on knowledge and resistance and believing education is a lifeline. This is not only my perspective, I'm sharing all of the perspectives of all researchers in Gaza. I'm so grateful to all the solidarity that we received from the whole world, especially here in Norway. But I think now we need to work and move fast because solidarity now needs to become more infrastructure. Sympathy must become systems. And Gaza doesn't need admiration for its resilience. It needs colleagues who will stand with it structurally, long-term. Let us protect not only Gaza scholars, but the very idea of the university. Thank you for time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abu Samra. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Salwa Suliman. She is an associate professor at the University of Bergen, a member of the Young Academy of Norway. Trained as a dentist from the University of Khartoum in Sudan, Salwa established herself as an interdisciplinary researcher specialized in translational and basic experimental research focused on bone tissue engineering. Salwa completed her PhD in tissue engineering group at the University of Bergen in 2015. She will now give us learning points from Sudan. The floor is yours.
Thank you for this kind introduction and kind invitation, and for the opportunity for me to share how the recent war in Sudan impacted academic sector and how the people and organizations responded to this, and any learning points that we could adapt to Gaza or any other war-torn area. So the war in Sudan, or the recent war in Sudan, started in April 2023 due to a vicious power struggle between the Sudanese military forces and the paramilitary forces. And this led to what is now labeled by the WFP as the world's largest humanitarian crisis. This war led to a huge displacement. Up till last week, there are 12 million, almost 12 million people that are displaced in Sudan, 7 million inside Sudan and 4 million outside Sudan. And this, of course, reflects very well on the significant displacement on academicians as well. So there's a huge number of university lecturers, professors, and students as well who have been displaced inside and outside Sudan. Prior to this war, Sudan hosted a relatively high number of higher education institutes, more than 50 public universities, private universities and colleges, and more than 50% of these institutes were located in the capital state, Khartoum. After the war, this led to more than 19 million children without schooling, more than 100 universities and research institutes that were significantly damaged, looted, and destroyed, that disrupted, of course, student enrollment in these universities and faculty retention across the country. And as you can see, a picture that exemplifies the scale of this destruction. Recent studies that have looked into the displacement, the scale of the displacement, showed that more than 30% of these academicians, including students, are displaced outside Sudan, mostly in Egypt and in the neighboring Gulf countries. And focusing on researchers specifically, more than 60% of these researchers are currently abroad outside Sudan. How did this war impact these displaced academicians? If we look at the ones that are displaced locally, they have a range of challenges which resonate very much with what we've heard from the previous speakers. In Gaza, so they have challenges of destructed and completely closed universities and institutes, loss of infrastructure for teaching as well as research materials, all the way to financial strains where they were working without salaries or limited, reduced salaries. And of course, last but not least, psychological burdens. Considering the displaced externally academicians, they had the same challenges in addition to limited opportunities in these foreign settings because of the professional and social networks that they have lost along the way. There was several interventions in the war, after the war, to help academicians in Sudan. There were local responses and there were also international responses. Regarding the local responses, they all highlighted the resilience of the academicians in Sudan. Some of these interventions involved the universities moving into remote learning platforms that were already established during the COVID pandemic. There were also institutes that moved into more regional areas in Sudan that were relatively safer, and these institutes shared students and staff as well, and they shared facilities with these universities that they hosted. There were also displaced faculties as well as volunteer faculties from the diaspora that took part in the remote teaching and mentorship as well. And there were also interventions where exams were arranged in safer areas for students to be able to take these exams. Exams were also arranged in neighboring countries that hosted most of these displaced people, for example, Egypt and Saudi Arabia. And this is also a recent study where they tried to survey, asking students what is the form of education they're going into now. And more than 35% responded that they're getting their lectures as PDF or some sort of audio recordings in social media or some kind of distant learning. And the second highest responded that they were still enrolled in the university, but there was no active teaching happening. And of course, these local responses were faced with a lot of challenges: blackouts, limited digital infrastructure, inadequate faculties to support this kind of training, and of course, the disciplines that needed some kind of practical training, like clinical and engineering disciplines, could not benefit a lot from these remote platforms. There were also a few private universities that were able to relocate to regional countries in Africa, specifically Tanzania and Rwanda. But these relocations were spearheaded by Sudanese academicians. And of course, it was a regional solidarity. But unfortunately, this was limited to only those who had the financial means. But it was a great opportunity for especially medical students to complete their training. Regarding international response, it was essential, but it was limited. There were, of course, some NGOs that were mobilized to be able to support these schools to start reopening and rebuilding their infrastructure. There were limited scholar rescue fellowships that were provided to Sudanese students and scholars that placed some Sudanese academics into host institutions all around the world. There were also limited university-targeted initiatives and postgraduate programs like MPhils and Masters, targeting Sudanese scholars and students at risk in the UK and University of Oxford and Cambridge, USA and Turkey. But they were quite limited relative to the needs. And also the funding was quite limited. It was short, so the scholars or students were not able to integrate long-term. Other phases of the intervention, there were also mentoring programs, distant, that were initiated by some academies of science, especially in the African society. Scholars were given free memberships to access capacity building courses and also infrastructures or libraries in these science initiatives. There were also other interventions, something that also was applied here in Norway, where they adapted existing institutional collaborations, like the Sudan-Norway Academic Collaboration, that is at the University of Bergen and CMI's, Christian Michelsen's Institute, together with several institutes in Sudan. It's an already established collaboration, so they adapted this collaboration to be able to produce more projects to host displaced Sudanese academicians and scholars and students and fund new relevant research as well. Interestingly, these displaced academics were using this opportunity or found this opportunity as an opportunity for growth, both professionally and personally. So this was a recent study where they surveyed, asked more than 400 displaced academicians if they would go back to their home institutes after the war, and more than 60% responded yes. And on the right, you can see a quotation from one of the academicians that is currently hosted in Malaysia, and she acknowledges and highlights the importance of how these Sudanese academics need to be well prepared to rebuild Sudan when they come back. Which brings me to the importance of how the international community should focus on rebuilding the Sudanese infrastructure and education, or any war-torn area like Gaza, which resonates a lot with the requests and the recommendations from the previous speakers as well. So how can the international and the Norwegian academic society help the researchers in war-torn areas? A few recommendations, and I think the most important thing that needs to be in the spotlight now is to prioritize mental health and the community care of these academicians and researchers. We should focus on trying to fund to continue the remote infrastructure that is already in place for education and capacity building of these scholars to contribute to rebuilding or building these infrastructures. Also supporting the relocation of these academics to regional areas or safer areas close to their homes and home universities is very important to be able to relocate them back when things are safer. Moving on to other phases, recommendations such as launching rapid scholar rescue scholarships, for instance, but these need to be expedited. Fellowships with quick admin and visa processes, of course. I think we should also focus more on using the diaspora and using international peers to help with mentoring these students and young researchers. Especially virtual scholar schemes, we've already seen that mentioned. I know that a few universities in Europe offer virtual affiliations for scholars to be able to access their academic community, be part of their conferences, workshops, libraries, etc., which is absolutely helpful for them at this phase. I also think supporting research that addresses the immediate needs of these communities is important, either by specific grants for these calls or helping the actual scholars to carry on the research that is relevant for them at this time is also important to be able to make these scholars and universities very relevant post-war. But how can we support the academicians that are already displaced? I think one of the important things here we should talk about or think about is to drop the international tuition fees, reduce system-oriented processes for students and scholars, something that we at the Academy, at the Young Academy of Norway, have been quite occupied with the past few years. I think it's also important that we think of emergency grants that allow institutes to be able to hire the scholars that are already present now, or recruit the students, to be able to initiate already or expand collaborations that we already have, to be able to include the researchers in already existing projects. So there's already an interesting initiative from the Research Council about recruitment of talented researchers to Norway. I think if this can be revised in a way to target displaced researchers or researchers at risk, it might be more relevant. Supporting regional and neighboring universities in countries that are quite close to the areas of war is, I think, important and more relevant by either offering them funding for building infrastructure to be able to absorb extra capacity or offer conditional slots, etc. Also creating opportunities for capacity building from the distant is important. And last but not least, being able to recognize the certification of these students or scholars, either through embassies or other organizations, would help speeding up their processes for including them in our academics setups. So this might sound like a list of perfect solutions, but I think it's just the beginning. And I'm very happy that it resonates a lot with what I've heard in the past two talks. But I would like to just conclude that Sudan has showed us that goodwill matters, but I think speed and local leadership and sustainable funding would actually make the difference. Thank you for listening, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Suliman. I think we will try to have some questions after the next talk. We now going to have our final talk before the coffee break. We will hear from Eva Marie Schnelten, who is International Officer at the Royal Society of Edinburgh. She will talk about the experience from the Scottish Academy's international work and their Gaza meaning, so thus learning points from them as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for having me, for inviting me. So yeah, I'm the International Officer at the Royal Society of Edinburgh. And Within our international work, we also work a lot in the space of human rights and academic freedom. And we started having conversations around international conflict settings, very much sparked by the conflict in Gaza. And after the last university was destroyed in Gaza in January 2024, we were approached by some of our fellows, but we also internally started having conversations on how to approach, how to discuss the war in Gaza. And we therefore started discussing this with the universities to kind of see how they, the universities in Scotland, I should say, not across the UK, very much in Scotland, because the Royal Society of Edinburgh is the National Academy of Scotland. So we started having the conversations with the Scottish universities, which ended in a meeting that we convened at the RSE in August 2024, where we invited the higher education institutions across Scotland. The vast majority of them joined in person and online, and we discussed how to support the conflict in Gaza. But the recommendation from across the sector was very much to not focus on one conflict setting, but to see how we, as the Scottish higher education sector, can support academics from across the globe coming from conflict settings. And so we decided to do a research project on that to see what is currently being done at the Scottish universities to support academics in conflict zones, and how we could collaborate in that support and how we could take it a step further. So we very much focused on the research question: how can the Scottish higher education sector support colleagues and institutions in conflict settings? So we actually hired a qualitative researcher to do that project. The project started in December of last year and was concluded in April of this year. So our researcher, Charlotte, who did an absolutely brilliant job, conducted 36 qualitative interviews between January and March, online and in person, plus one written interview. And she also did an in-depth review of online resources. She interviewed 20 women and 16 men, 9 at-risk scholars and fellows that are based in Scotland, that were from Afghanistan, Eritrea, India, Iran, Palestine, Syria, Ukraine, and so on. And we identified different support types. So there's support that currently exists for at-risk individuals, mostly through scholarships and fellowships. So whether they were sanctuary scholarships, CARA membership. CARA is the Council for At-Risk Academics. The HESPAL scheme, which is a scheme by the British Council, and the Linda Norgrove Foundation, which is funding for women from Afghanistan in particular. So those scholarships and fellowships exist across Scottish universities. Then there were quite a few informal networks through individuals and institutions, so individual grant programs that universities offer, or individual initiatives and fundraising. There were also quite a few formal institutions, informal partnerships between institutions, whether that was through visiting programs, joint research projects, online teaching and mentoring, or even supply of equipment. And then the fourth pillar we identified was digital resource sharing through online lectures, online training, or library and journal access, although that needs to be built upon. We identified a few key stakeholders. So internally, for the institution, of course, the key stakeholders are senior institutional management, institutional support staff, whether that's research management or administration. Then, of course, the institutional teaching staff and the student body, which are very involved at the Scottish universities. And of course, the at-risk individuals, the current scholars and fellows themselves. External stakeholders that we work quite closely with and need to collaborate with further in the future: the UK and the Scottish government, the at-risk individuals that have not yet arrived, but are in the process of securing scholarships or fellowships. Then the domestic higher education institutions in the conflict settings, other international higher education institutions that were just mentioned as well in neighboring countries, for example. And then, of course, funders or NGOs, support organizations. So the gaps that we identified domestically is that once academics from conflict settings have secured the scholarships, the fellowships, the funding, the visa, once they arrive, the transition itself is really challenging and rather uneven. Despite the New Scots Initiative. The New Scots Initiative is the Scottish government initiative for refugees coming into Scotland. We don't really call them refugees, though. We call them New Scots because they have just arrived in Scotland, and we want to welcome them with that kind of language, which is a rather positive outlook on that. Accommodation is quite scarce and expensive. The processes are not clear, which causes a lot of anxiety and a lot of worries. And the scholars are often left to their own devices when it comes to that. There's little support. There's not one toolkit that they can refer to when it comes to these questions. There's a perceived lack of gender sensitivity when it comes to childcare needs, when it comes to schooling, when it comes to parental leave, for example. Of course, arriving in Scotland comes with the uncertainty of the future legal status and employment. That brings a lot of anxiety as well, that impacts their mental health, impacts the family dynamics, and of course it impacts their work as a researcher as well. And then as some of the gaps we identified internationally, the lack of research and grant support that would enable the academics to continue to work as normal. Just generally funding and payment challenges when it comes to eligibility criteria, for example, for scholars at risk, not being able to apply for certain funding just because of their legal status. Then tuition fees, even digital programs remain costed at international levels, which is very expensive. And of course, the perceived risk due to sanctions and politicization. So we often deal with self-censorship, for example. Now, I just mentioned the funding challenge. Here's a quote: "Finding accommodation was my responsibility, but I didn't know how to do that in the UK. Like, where do we start, right?" And that doesn't only go for accommodation. That goes for a lot of other things I just mentioned, like childcare and maternity leave, or even when it just comes to joining a gym, right? Like all these small things where the scholars are really just left to their own devices. So during the research, we learned some key lessons in the conversations we had with the universities, but especially with the scholars at risk themselves. Listening to and the communication with international institutions' needs is essential, very much following the motto of nothing about us without us. Doing something sooner is better than doing nothing. So it doesn't have to be perfect right from the get-go. It's very much a learning curve, and usually a very steep learning curve. But it's better to be seen to care, to be doing something, rather than just trying to get everything right in the first instance. Of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, we talked to individuals from very, very different conflict settings. And every crisis, every individual is very different. So every response to a conflict setting will have different needs. And it's really difficult to anticipate what that would look like. But I think just the realization of there is no one size fits all is crucial. There were quite a few, and I'll come back to that in a second when we talk about committees and working groups, because that was very much a recommendation to provide these planning spaces of how to help people with the actual on-the-ground questions upon arrival, but also the advocacy part of it. So these planning spaces are very much needed. We were warned to avoid overcommitting, as to not to promise to get individuals out of an active conflict, for example, which brings not just funding challenges, but I mentioned earlier visa, for example, right? We're very much dependent on the UK government, and the Scottish government itself can only advocate in that instance. It's very crucial to identify local partners, whether it's neighboring countries, institutions, the FCDO, which is our foreign office, or partners such as the British Council or local NGOs. And then also to provide university staff and the support staff, admin staff, but also the scholars at risk, Chatham House rule spaces where they can talk freely and feel safe. So the one thing that came through in all the conversations we had across the different institutions at different levels of admin, of the senior management staff, everybody agreed that it's this supporting academics and colleagues from conflict zones is not a space for competition. It's very much a space for collaboration. And that is very much something that we've seen in the conversations since the report came out. Like I said, we finished this project in April. It then underwent, of course, a vetting process internally, because there's quite a few sensitive quotes in there. And of course, it's a very sensitive topic in itself. But the report was finally published in June, and it was received very well. And this message very much still stands. It didn't only come across in the conversations we had. It's very much in all the follow-up meetings, in the discussions with the Scottish government, in the discussions internally. We're all in agreement that this is something where we need to work together in support of our colleagues abroad. So as I mentioned, the report finishes with quite a few recommendations for us as the National Academy of Scotland, but also for the universities itself, for partner institutions, and for us to all come together to work together. So one thing that we're currently exploring is the establishment of a sector working group or coordination group, where we would include partners, where we could potentially look into having specific task forces that would contain the expertise when it comes to creating a toolkit for housing, for example, in different cities, or when it comes to the eligibility criteria for funding, how to advocate for that. So we're hoping to set that kind of working group up in the next few months with representatives from each university and from partner organizations. That also feeds into the next point, where we hopefully can create some kind of forum where we can share that information, because we do have universities that have funding, for example, but they might be missing expertise in certain areas. But we might have the universities with the expertise, but without the funding, that they don't know of each other. They don't have that kind of communication set up. So we, as the convening body in Scotland, are very much hoping to give them that space to have that mutual learning, for the entire sector to benefit from that. And then to use that space for conferences, for workshops, for these safe discussion spaces, to have that kind of knowledge exchange. Then explore the allocation of grants directly to the researchers and staff abroad. That, of course, that requires a little bit of planning, again, when it comes to eligibility criteria. And then, of course, the whole, building that relationship with the Scottish sector, and then the partners abroad that would receive the funding, establish that kind of trust as well. So that is something that we're very keen to explore. Then, of course, getting the Scottish government involved. And I have to say that they've been absolutely wonderful. They've been very supportive, very keen, very enthusiastic, and were very involved in, about 4 weeks ago, getting 13 Palestinian students to Scotland that are now based at the University of Glasgow, the University of Edinburgh, the University of St Andrews, the University of Aberdeen, and the University of Dundee. So 13 Palestinians have just arrived in Scotland, and I think there's more, well, at least we're planning to welcome more Palestinian students in the next few weeks and months. But how can we work together with the Scottish government to enable that? And then also to celebrate the support that currently exists and all the work that we're currently putting in to have that grow, and to see how, what the uniquely Scottish story there is. And then the last point is, how can we make the most of peace? What post-conflict support can be delivered? And that, again, feeds into something that I mentioned earlier about digital resources, for example, and then also funding going directly into the higher education institutions for rebuilding. So after this report came out in June, we actually reconvened the universities in a follow-up meeting. Like I mentioned earlier, we met for the first time in August 2024, where this kind of report was recommended to us, which we now delivered. And so we thought that the next logical step would be to get the universities together again to say, okay, we've done our homework, we've done what you asked us to do. These are the recommendations. How can we now achieve them together? So we met again at the beginning of September, and in breakout groups discussed these recommendations. And we are now internally at the Royal Society of Edinburgh discussing on how to best convene and continue to convene this group of the Scottish universities and partner institutions, so we can actually deliver, maybe not all, but some, or at least start delivering some of the recommendations. So we're now actively looking into how to fund that on our end, maybe even hiring a full-time position to help coordinate this project. But as I said before, the enthusiasm, the level of motivation is there, and we really want to keep the momentum going. And so we are now looking to reconvene that group again in December, just to kind of keep the ball rolling and to keep the conversation going. But yeah, I think that is a very brief overview of what we've done so far. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. The report can be found on our website if you want to have a closer look at that. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Eva Maria. We now move to the section for comments and reflection on all the talks we've had. So we don't have much time, unfortunately, as I suspected, but let's use at least 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes of our coffee break to open for reflections, comments, questions.
First of all, thank you all. I thought all the talks were very interesting. My question is for Dr. Salwa Suliman. I thought all of the suggestions that you had were very interesting, and I hope that we can see some of them come into fruition, because Sudanese higher education is in dire need of all of the support that they can get. I was just wondering on the point that you mentioned about that mental health support is the primary or one of the most important things that we should work on. Could you elaborate on what that would entail? How could you support researchers' mental health?
Yeah, thank you. This is a very important question, difficult to answer. But a few things that I could think of is the fellowships that are available for these scholars could probably include some kind of psychological or counseling part of it. I also think that having these scholars be part of safe communities, scientific communities abroad would also help in improving their mental health. Also providing distant counseling. It does not only have to be focused on their academic or career building, but I think if we provide some kind of distant counseling through volunteer psychologists. Actually, before the talk, I've spoken to someone here who's a psychologist, and maybe he could have extra points to add. Sorry to put you in the spotlight, but in case there's anything you could also think of, maybe I would be happy to hear.
Thank you very much. I am Ahmed Abu Shaban from the University of Oslo. Thank you for the speakers. I have a question that I can address to all, but mostly to Asma. She knows why I'm asking. We know each other. It's about involving, you're talking about measures at macro level, concerning infrastructure and practices that need to be rebuilt as well, not only buildings. But there are also micro level repair work that we need to do, and everyone needs to contribute. So when it comes to the micro level, how can we help individual scholars who are already in the Western world now and try to become involved in scientific work, want to contribute, be part of our communities, to fill that gap and that empty space between, that creates loneliness, while balancing out, their needs for space, for psychological safety, being with themselves in a space that's not threatened by workload and our own demands from that, the regular academics kind of have to deal with. So how can we involve them, but yet respect the space they're in?
Thank you for this question, and I think it's very important, a question, and I have two ways to answer it. Maybe from my own perspective, because I'm a researcher here, under Scholar at Risk, I feel secure. I have all of the privilege and the opportunity to proceed with my own research, but in the same time, I have bonds to my country. I feel like I'm still here, but my soul and my heart is still located there in Gaza. And yeah, I'm free, but in the bigger prison where I feel like the people in Gaza who are the free people inside. So you have like this bond. You need to be yourself. You need to have this research, academic continuity. This is the thing that I only know. But in the same time, I don't have the umbrella of stability, for example. So if I want to employ all of this knowledge, I need to find myself in a more stable ground in terms of conducting research or involved of something that I'm skillful on, for example, like international projects. I have been like academic lead for different academic projects in collaboration, even here with Norway, and unfortunately some of these projects were terminated and suspended during the war because of the continuation of the war in Gaza. Although we depicted different solutions that we can make reallocations of the budget to really support the people who were under fire. We can just minimize their suffering and mitigate their problems, because that's why we have research projects, and that's why we have donation and fundings. It's not like a matter of showing that we are providing support and effort or investing our money. It's not a kind of investment. It's about making support for the people worldwide. So that's why I felt, not only me, lots of people inside Gaza, because yesterday I was talking to lots of people who were involved in projects, and they were naming some projects were terminated. And that's why I keep talking about in the macro level, we need just to open more and more research project opportunities for people where we can employ all of these scholars, for example, and researchers, because first, they have the knowledge of the context. They have their connections with the people out there. And this is our knowledge and persistence that all of the time we try to find solutions, even if we work from the bottom-up level. But in Gaza, we know that this works. And that's why when we started here in Norway, we're thinking like, try to analyze most of the struggles and the challenges that the academics and students face, and to put simple solutions can be solved through research. But what we are really missing is the funding. So it's the time to open lots of projects proposals limited to people inside war, limited to people inside Gaza, to create their own solutions. It's the time to create more research group where the Palestinians can make needs assessment. Again, this is a tremendous needs for needs assessment. There is a tremendous needs to discuss and see the status of ceasefire, the psychological impact. When Salwa was addressed with this question related to psychological problem, we witnessed lots of people providing psychological support for the people in Gaza. I remember that I met a woman, she was talking to the other ladies how to secure their children when they are scared when hearing the bomb. And then I took her aside and said, "How are you? Are you fine? She wasn't. She lost her house, she lost her husband, and she was living in a tent near to the coastal area, which was facing floods all of the time. So she was giving psychological support, which is she actually missing. And again, the umbrella is a huge, and that's why I said this is the chance for lots of countries to provide such opportunities. And what's the best rather than psychological, for example, research, and as well as different research projects that can invest their efforts, their minds, and their mentalities to do something crucial, I mean on the ground.
We'll take one more question before.
Anne Lee, University of Oslo. Thank you so much to all of you for wonderful talks. This is a question, I guess, mainly for Eva Maria, but also for the others, if they want to. But and first, a comment, which is that I think it's really, and it's sort of also a thank you to the Academy of Sciences that they do this, that I think it's really about time that we start to talk about how to support higher education in, crisis and wars worldwide, because, we haven't had that link between, what's that called, bistand? Development aid and higher education. I think that needs to be sort of tightened, both budget-wise and elsewhere, in important ways. And it was interesting to hear also about your initiative in Scotland, Eva Maria. But I have a question, and that is, I really appreciate and see what you say when you say that, this is not a competition. Because sometimes we hear that, that, yeah, it's not, it's worse there, or it's not. So I appreciate that. On the other side, I sort of hear it as a political, strategical, rhetorical device to enable us to talk about Gaza. And I wonder why. I mean, that is because Sudan doesn't have that political problem with it. And my experience, I will tell about that later, is about, is working with Gaza and seeing how big a problem authorities make out of that question in, ways that doesn't necessarily even reflect their population. So my question is rather, was this you chose to focus on so many places. Why did you do that, and why didn't you, for instance, choose to focus, in the first instance on Gaza and Sudan, for instance?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think I'm really sorry, because I meant the space for competition within Scotland. I didn't mean so much on an international scale. It was very much meant about how Scottish universities usually compete for funding, right, and funding bids in that space.
Sorry. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was more for them to realize that, okay, the University of Edinburgh and the University of Glasgow are the biggest universities we have, not just in size when it comes to the student body or staff, but when it comes to funding. And for them to be on the same page to say, like, okay, let's put all of that aside. We're not competing here to see who can get the most students in, or who can get the most money in, or have leverage with certain philanthropy organizations to get the most money in. It's very much for them to say, we're leaving all of that behind. In this space, we are collaborating. But your last question, very quickly, the conversation started very much with Gaza. We were approached by some of our fellows as well, whether we're going to say something, whether we're going to put a statement out, whether we're going to have a more productive approach to that. And when we then convened the universities, it was their request to not just look at one conflict setting in anticipation of the questions we would receive if we had only focused on Gaza. Because we would then maybe get the question of, like, but why are you not looking at Sudan? Why are you not looking at Myanmar? Why are you excluding Ukraine? So it was very much just in anticipation of that, to see what support exists for academics that are facing persecution, that are facing crisis in their country on a global scale. So it was more that than neglecting one country, if you know what I mean.
Thank you, Eva Maria, and thank you, everyone. We now move on to the coffee break. So I suggest we're a little bit behind schedule, but and thank you, Dr. Abu Samra and Dr. Suliman. Thank you so much for your talks. It is now my pleasure to introduce Anne Kveim Lie, professor at the Department of Community Medicine and Global Health at the University of Oslo. She has a background in medicine and intellectual history and holds a doctoral degree in medical history from the University of Oslo. She will tell us the story about how she worked to get Palestinian medical students from Gaza to Norway. The floor is yours.
I thought I should start with showing you the photo of the 10 medical students we had with us last semester, no, not last semester, last autumn, because they should actually have been the one to tell this story, although there's some things I can tell from the Norwegian part and the sort of management part of it that they, I guess, couldn't tell that well, but most of the rest of the things I'm going to tell, I will sort of try to tell through their voices. So this is the happy day in August 2024 when they arrived, and a lot had happened before that. So let's start. So the status, spring 2024, hospitals have become battlegrounds. Actually, they had been since the start of the war. Medical schools, both of them were destroyed. And here to the right, we see, I think we saw that in the first session this morning. This is a photo of the Al-Azhar University, the medical school building where my students were, I'm saying my, you understand, I don't really mean that, but were studying. And then here after the bombing, before the complete destruction that happened in June. At that, and more than 1,200 healthcare personnel had been killed. Now it's more than 1,700. So, and in Cairo, I knew that 200 displaced medical students from the 2 medical schools were residing without a place to stay, without a place to study, and despairing about the situation. The government of Egypt didn't want to do anything, and as everyone else, I think, actually at this situation, I was just in despair. What can we do? How can we work? And I didn't have any previous relationship with Palestinian academics. My parents did their honeymoon in a refugee camp in the West Bank in 1967. So I sort of am brought up as a Palestinian, with Palestinian solidarity, but I wasn't really, so I had no idea how to engage. That's what I try to say here. And then I got an email from Hilde Reksjø, a colleague of mine who is working at the Health Center for Undocumented Migrants. One of her best friends is Dr. Khalil Abu Foul, who was the board, or is still the chair of the board for the Al-Azhar University. And Hilde had read an op-ed, and I'm telling this in detail to show you how things can happen. I think it's interesting. An op-ed from 4 of my medical students in Norway. They had written and they were also part of the Palestinian encampment, and they had written an op-ed in the Norwegian Journal for the Medical Association, asking the Medical Association to do more. So this was actually her trying to reach out to the students and copying me in. And we decided a meeting with Dr. Abu Foul, which was a wonderful meeting. He told us what they had already done, which was amazing, and also made me realize how little actually we in the academic sector in Norway had done already. So in Montreal, all the data of Al-Azhar, at least the medical students, I think it actually is for all students at Al-Azhar, had been stored at the data. So they had managed to provide a server to Al-Azhar universities to all the data, which is crucial for medical students. I mean, all their exams, everything were recorded. So they had done that already. They had converted to an online system for the students inside and outside of Gaza using the pandemic support they already had. So, he said, my main problem right now is actually these students that are here in Cairo. He himself a refugee. I was so impressed by that man and that institution and how they worked with their students. So he said, that is what I want you to your help with now. And then I thought maybe we should work within existing structures. And we have an exchange program at the University of Oslo, which does not include any countries in conflict, only sort of, so that wasn't part of it, but it is an English-speaking semester. And I thought maybe we could add them there. And it was amazing. So this meeting was in 27th of May, and then 1 week after, the whole university was involved, the central study administration, the rector was all in, probably also very tired from all the pressure from the student encampment, and again, other people having pressured him. But he was very much for it, and that was crucial that he was. We had very little time because we heard from UDI that the applications had to be in by the 1st of July. So, and before that, we had to write an MOU, so Memorandum of Understanding, because if you don't have that, and I'm saying this because it's relevant for everyone who wants to work with Palestinian students. If you don't have an MOU, students need to pay fees. Institutional fees, so you need an MOU. So we did that in maybe record speed. Al-Azhar themselves selected 10 students. We found a place to stay, which is practically impossible, but the administration managed to do that with CU. Miracle, and if not, we had to forget about the permit. I tried to contact everyone I knew, used all my contacts to try to get finances, but in the end, what made it happen was that the dean of the medical school said, we will do this. So it was just, very many important decisions taken in a short round of time, and this would never have happened. So I'm here, but this was a collective effort, starting with these students writing this op-ed to the rector at the University of Oslo. We needed a language test, because without a language test, you cannot be formally admitted to the University of Oslo, and everyone knew that these students did not have money and couldn't register for a TOEFL test fast enough, so we did sort of also that informally, but that way I got to meet them individually and hear about their lives before and after the 7th of October. Yeah, and then we helped them submit the applications, and the central study office, as well as our own at the medical school administration, did an amazing job. So we handed in after all this fantastic work, we felt we had a really good case, and I was so naive. I thought this would be, easy. Everyone knew what the health side was happening. I mean, how health institutions had themselves been targets. This was such an important thing to do this. And although, I have been working at this health center for undocumented migrants, I know how hard it is, but I thought this would be, well, this is just to show you what they also told me, these students, about, this is Gaza. I had never been, so they told me about their lives. They showed me pictures of their study rooms, also telling me, how in previous wars, bombs would come, but also, the tragedy that had happened after 7th of October. And then we heard that UDI said no, that they did not want to give them student visa. And we were furious, actually all of us. I think we just got a voksenopplæring, how do you say that in adult education, on how strict the system really is, and I have known that before. I have had foreign or students coming in, so PhD and postdocs coming in from parts of the world, which is sort of yellow countries in the UDI's traffic light judging, but I had not anticipated this in this way, and many of us did that. So they were denied permit, and then the whole. This is my first time as an activist in Norway, and it was actually quite fun, and we involved a lot of people. So we had signature, I think maybe I have, yeah, so we got 5,300 signatures in one day, and we reached 10,000 in 3 days, and it was just ongoing. So, yeah, and a lot of, you see here, influencers involving, because everybody thought this was just insane. And with a lot of doubt, I also involved the Gaza students themselves. So this is Manar Al-Qadari, one of the incredibly bright students. She informed, during the 6 months, she informed the Norwegian public about the value of education as a form of resistance, but also a form of democratic society building in Palestine, but also here, you know, gave input into what conditions they were facing, because in this debate, politicians from the right in Norway would say that, oh, they had heard that some of them were had an offer in South Africa, so why couldn't the nærområdene, they called it, kind of lack of geographical knowledge. And then Manar very politely just taught them, you know, that South Africa, Norway is actually closer to Cairo than. And then I mean, I had never thought this would happen. So then actually they turned in the foreign ministry, and I think they wanted to do this all the time, but it is difficult. And it's only the second time they have overturned such a, you know, decision in that case, which was incredible for us, but also, and we had started to lose hope, and especially the students who were so glad. So then yeah, they came, they met the ministers. Manar, who was already a public figure, was accepting to hold a speech at the Youngstorget in front of 5,000 people demonstrating the school demonstrations, and that text later came out as a wonderful text in The Guardian, which I encourage everyone to read. We used them in 2 seminars we had that autumn. They were used by a lot of other people who, you know, wanted to, I say use, but they actually, you know, they wanted to do it. So, but they participated in seminars illuminating Palestinian society. They shared of their lives before and after, and really embodied for the many people who listened to them throughout these 6 months. Life in politics of Gaza, but also the pride of that people and with the intellectual capabilities they showed and taught us. So this is just some of the articles. I really recommend the interview with Mohammed in Universitas last year, where he just tells about his love for Gaza. And you know, the reason why they said no to the residence permit was that they were sure that all the students would remain in Oslo. And I thought, well, yeah, it wouldn't have surprised me if they had, because they had most of them had families inside Gaza. There was no offer provided by the Arab states for a place to study, to continue their education, so I wouldn't have blamed them. But Norway was also difficult because our medical school is in Norwegian. So, okay, no, so I'll tell this at the end of the story soon. I'll just show you that sometimes, and this is maybe to the Academy of Sciences, because my experience with working with leadership around the higher education in Norway and maybe also politicians is that this question is so difficult. Mainly, not so much politicians, but this question is so difficult. You know, it's so difficult, but it isn't so difficult. I mean, our experience is that the medical students in Norway, they were actually really embracing this. So this is with them. We had contact students for each of them. First dinner that they arranged. Holzweiler gave them a lot of clothes. I mean, I got so much for them. So they got clothes for 100,000 kroners, I think, or something like that. They were invited to the National Ballet. So here are them with them after the show. They were invited out for trips. and they were in Sandnessjøen, the whole of Helgeland's coast. They saved money to invite them, so they flew us up there and hosted us in private families and arranged this solidarity meeting, which was pure love. You know, they were so embraced with love. And I just want to say that because some of you talked about psychological support, but what my students said when I offered psychological support, that was, Anne, we are not post-trauma, we are within trauma. We don't have a PTSD, we have enduring suffering. We don't want that kind of treatment. Psychologist is not going to help us in this. But your warmth and collective solidarity, that will help us. And I think that's important. It's very easy to just say we need psychologists, but what they actually need in these circumstances is a collective that receives them. I think that was also one of the messages from the Scottish government, that we need to think about this when we're building, or when we're doing something with people who have been very much. So they taught me that. I think it's really true. So that was a incredible experience, and I wish that all the university leaders who find this question so difficult could have been with us to Sandnessjøen, where they just opened houses. Real 5 minutes or 2 minutes? Okay. Yeah, but I'm very soon ready. Where the leader of the municipality, a right-wing party, she had made a fish soup for us when we traveled around in that community, because they wanted to see the primary health care. This is not difficult out with people out there. We make it difficult. It's not so difficult. So this is just Sandnessjøen, where they actually also went up to the Seven Sisters. I just wanted to show you. And then, because one of the things I started when we were trying to complain for where they denied the visas, was to work with other organizations out in Europe that were working to find a place for displaced students. And I got contact with an organization called Oxford Gaza, which is Oxford alumni and professionals who are working in Gaza, or have been working in Gaza as a solidarity work for physicians. And through them, I came in touch with the South African community. And at Pretoria University, they were actually thinking of receiving new students from Palestine. So this is of our transition meeting, or a picture of our transition meeting. And they eventually left us in January to Pretoria. So now I'm finishing, but I just wanted to say this is just a window into what happened last year, which was a gift to me, to the students, and to their teachers at the Medical School of Oslo. And we are not taking any more. It was expensive, it took work. So where are they going? Well, they're going to the nærområder. So last year, Pakistan took 100 medics and 50 dentists. This year, they take 150 medics plus 50 dentists. In Malaysia, they take 50 medics. In South Africa, they took 27 in Cape Town, 10 mine students, and 20 to Joburg. And now they're increasing the uptake in the UK. So this solidarity work is ongoing, and it's going other places. And I really welcome the Nordpol initiative, but I heard about it in March. I'm so curious about what they're doing, because I hope they're really working hard. This is urgent. It's a crisis out there. So please tell us what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we move on to the next talk. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tuful Abu Hodayb, professor at the Department of Archaeology, Conservation and History. She earned her PhD in History and Culture at the University of Chicago, taught modern Middle East history at the University of Oxford, and she will now talk about how to use your researcher voice. The floor is yours.
So yes, I've been asked to talk a little bit about the work we did as historians for Palestine. This is a little bit of a shift in perspective, because we didn't work with academics or historians in Gaza or in Palestine, but it is us here in Norway and how we used our research skills in order to do something. So I will talk a little bit about what we have done, how we have done it, before concluding with some remarks about the future, what can be done. So how did it all start? March 2025, not too long ago. The situation was that many organizations, international, Norwegian, NGOs, the labor unions, Save the Children, Amnesty, Norwegian People's Aid, just to mention a few, including politicians from different parties in Norway, were trying to raise awareness about the fact that we, through our pension fund, are invested, potentially complicit in war crimes and occupation. But there was no reaction in terms of revisiting the investments that the pension fund has in Israel or in the weapons industry. And this even as Israel had started its starvation campaign in Gaza earlier this year. So, born out of frustration, as also Anne experienced, it was in this context that two of my colleagues, Eli Farstad from the University of Southeastern Norway and Paul Nygaard from BI Norwegian Business School, they took contact with several colleagues, all of us historians, with the idea of doing a dugnad-based kind of research. So, collective effort, voluntary towards a common goal. To investigate the pension fund's potential contribution to war crimes and occupation. And naturally, all the people who were contacted were enthusiastic, and we set to work. We started out as 14 historians. Today, we're over 20 from at least a dozen universities and research institutions across Norway. So what have we done? So like I said, there were already investigations of this kind by different parties, including the Palestine Committee. But we decided to start by focusing on the pension fund's investments in Israeli companies, specifically. Two reasons for this. I mean, the pension fund is very important for Norwegians, but also it was a way to try and do something from our little corner in the world, little but rich corner of the world. So we did two things. The first is we went systematically through the database. This is all public information. You can filter the investments by country. So we got 65 Israeli companies that the pension fund is invested in. We were about 14, 60 divided by 14. We each got 4 to 5 companies, and we divided the work this way. The other thing we did is that we used our training as academics and as historians to research these companies. So there were other investigations before that, and one of the problems that we continuously ran up against, looking at these previous publications or on the internet, is that there were no references. There was no way to verify them. So that's one thing we did. We had actually a template with a font and spacing and footnotes and citation style and bibliographies and all the boring stuff we do as academics. But we also used our skills as historians, because I don't know if there are any historians here, but one thing we like to brag about is how fantastic we are at reading sources, source criticism, right? Kildekritikk. And we did that. We applied it. We did not have any access to secret documents or buried archives. We just used stuff out there on the net, open. We looked at the company websites. We looked at their the periodic reports that they issued. A lot of them published on the Tel Aviv stock market website. We looked at the press, including the Hebrew press, the Israeli press in Hebrew. And we read these sources and, with our training, evaluated their reliability and cited as such. The result was a report of over 100 pages on all of these companies, where we concluded that around 30 of the 65 companies we investigated pose an unacceptable or high risk of violating the pension fund's ethical guidelines. We used the guidelines themselves that the Ethics Council had, which is that they either contribute or can be linked to, and I'm quoting, gross or systematic violations of human rights and or serious violations of individual rights in war and conflict situations. So how did we share our knowledge? Because as many academics know, it's one thing writing about something, another one having others read it. So we tried to be systematic about it. I mean, we had regular meetings, and we tried to be systematic about it. One thing we did is establish contact with both journalists and politicians who have showed an interest in these investments.
The other was to publish an op-ed in Aftenposten, which is one of the leading newspapers in the country, in early June. And this came out, we timed it to come out on the day that Parliament was discussing the pension fund's investments. And the report was cited also in Parliament discussions. That day, nothing came out of it. The Parliament voted against sharpening the investments in Israel. But what the concrete thing that came out of it for us is that the number of members of our Historians for Palestine increased. And the last thing we did in what will prove to be a stroke of genius, not my idea, but I have to say it's a stroke of genius now in retrospect, which is that we sent copies of the report to the Ministry of Finance, the Council on Ethics, and the Central Bank of Norway. This was at the end of June. Summer came, and all was quiet on the Western Front, even as the bombs continued to rain on Gaza. An article came out in early July on the Free Fagbevegelse website, taking up a company called Bet, and in which the pension fund is invested, and talking about why it might be problematic. They basically maintain and supply jet engines to fighter jets in Israel. Their main client is basically the Israeli army. Still nothing happened. It did not upset any summer idyll in Norway. And it wasn't until Aftenposten, again, published on the same company, Bet, in early August, that the balloon went up. The rest, so to speak, is history, because when the government claimed that this was the first they had heard of it when they read the Aftenposten piece, we were very obliging to point out that no, it actually sent a report. And Bet is one of the companies that we thought were problematic. So from that point on, things really moved very quickly. Now, I'm not claiming that it is just our work that did it, but I think we, in the end, contributed to this momentum in a very concrete way. And Stoltenberg, the finance minister himself, went in and promised to address this soon, and admitting that our report had not actually been handled the way it should have. And since then, there have been 2 waves of divestment from Israeli companies, and it's with a total of 17 excluded. And more importantly, I think, the management of investments in Israel has been brought home, which means, I mean, this is not all public knowledge, right? So, which means that previously there were Israeli financial companies doing the investments on our behalf in Israel. Now, when you think about the problem with corruption in Israel, this really is problematic. But we don't know exactly who's doing investments where, because this is not public information. So this is the story, in short. And the question is, where to go from here? Because there's obviously a lot of work still. There are still many companies in the report that we submitted that have not been excluded, that we think is problematic. But not only us. Ireland's State Investment Fund thinks some of these are problematic. Storebrand, KLP, Norway's largest pension company, have excluded some of them. The multinational French insurance company, AXA. So there's still a lot of work to do. There's also investments in international companies, weapons companies that needs to be taken up, et cetera, et cetera. And what we will do is an ongoing discussion. My colleague who here also, Anna, is part of that discussion, and we're right now assessing where to go from here. So what I'm about to say now is more a reflection of my thoughts than the discussions we've had, because we haven't really talked that much about it. And these reflections come from the fact that I'm not just a historian for Palestine, I'm also a historian of Palestine. So I know the area a bit more than just passing knowledge. And I think there are obvious areas that have been addressed and talked about. The needs for Gaza at this point seem unsurmountable. Beyond just the sheer effort of reconstruction, there's a need to understand the effects of trauma, malnutrition, environmental degradation, and not just now, because this has repercussions for generations to come. And this entails research in many disciplines: medicine, health, psychology, environment, and I think Dr. Shaban, our first speaker, has also talked about this issue. Which is to not only to document, but also to reflect on, to do this in a way that reflects what Palestinians themselves want, what they think of when they talk about their own future. And of course, there is that permanent Palestinian obsession with education, and we've also heard a lot about this. And I think the next speaker has a good deal to say as well, so I will not say much about it. I think also Dr. Asma and Dr. Ahmed Shaban have said a good deal. But I will just say this, again, as a historian working with the UNRWA archives, that UNRWA, which is the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees, when they first started working in 1950 in Palestinian camps, it was Palestinians themselves who demanded to have schools, just to underline the central place that education has in Palestinian society. And also it's been very tightly interwoven with resistance. So a lot of the universities that started in the West Bank and Gaza after '67, they were started precisely because Palestinians were cut off from Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt, where they would go for higher education. I want to speak, but to say something beyond that, because I think other speakers have said something, that this did not start on October 7, and it certainly does not end with Trump's peace plan. To go back to something that Dr. Shaban mentioned, which is settler colonialism, and those of you who have read about settler colonialism have also read about the fact that it is not an event, but rather a structure of oppression, which is still there. And so it's good to hear about what we can do in context of crisis, and to also talk about Sudan, which I think we don't talk enough about Sudan. But also, you have to keep in mind that in Palestine, it's not just about crisis. It's a kind of oppression that happens even when we're not talking about crisis. The things that we don't usually hear about in the news, the things that are happening in the West Bank, for example, as we speak, also in education. So I will also want to say something which tries to work against this divide and rule of thinking about Gaza and the West Bank as two separate things, but try to think across them. Especially now, I think, with the Trump so-called peace plan and the danger this has for trying to split the histories from each other. So I will mention two things. One has to do with the past and the other with the future. With the past, as a historian, of course, the human loss in Gaza is enormous, that one feels guilty even talking about other kinds of losses. But there's a lot of history that has been lost in Gaza, in the urban fabric, in structures, in libraries, in books, in archives, in all these educational institutions. UNRWA, again, they managed actually to take their archive, and now they're digitizing it in a huge digitization effort in Amman, in Jordan. There are also many initiatives by Palestinians themselves, and there has been a huge drive towards digitization in recent decades, the last 2 decades. And these are invaluable for preserving Palestinian history and identity, but they also are excellent opportunities for us to come. Because if we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about servers, we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about funding, there's a lot that can be done by researchers here, not in terms of aid, but in terms of solidarity and collaboration. For example, one NGO I was working with the archives of in the West Bank, they wanted funding to digitize their archive, and they have a fantastic archive. But the funding they got from the US wanted them to sign a clause that says that they do not support terrorism. Now, what does terrorism mean for the US and Israel? That is also problematic. So these are clauses that they cannot sign up to. So this is one area that has to do with the past and preserving, basically, Palestinian history and identity. And the other one has to do with the future, because we talked about the Palestinian obsession with education, and the other Palestinian obsession is justice, and that stubborn belief that justice will prevail someday. And there have been a lot of efforts at documenting, precisely with that in mind, documenting incidents, documenting land theft, documenting all sorts of things. And the NGOs that started in the 1980s are also part of that effort towards both documenting, but also placing the Palestinian issue more explicitly, more clearly in the framework of human rights and international law. Now, Israel a few years ago designated some of the most leading and well-respected of these organizations as terrorist organizations. Again, to go back to what is the definition of terrorist. We're talking about really well-respected organizations that had been receiving funding from the EU and Norway. The reaction both from the EU and Norway was like, frankly, disappointing. And during this, after they criminalized them, a lot of these offices were ransacked, and they were not looking for weapons. You see the surveillance cameras, they were actually ransacking file drawers, right? So it is precisely this effort at documentation which is under attack. And again, there are a lot of opportunities here for collaboration and support. I will give just one example, which is the Forensic Architecture Unit, which is based at Goldsmith University of the University of London. They've worked with historians, lawyers, architects, IT people, scientists, etc., to investigate and document using sound, images from mobile phones, satellite images, geolocations, in order to do their own investigations and documentation. So again, there are so many multidisciplinary possibilities that open up here for the future, for justice. Of course, right now, Gaza is a priority, but I'm just saying these things to underline the fact that there is also continuity, and it's important to keep it in mind. And it's also important to keep in mind that helping Palestinians as researchers is not about doing them a favor or teaching them how to do things. I think it's very clear from the presentations we had before that the expertise, the knowledge, the energies, the human resources are there. But they are being undermined in the West Bank and all but obliterated in terms of infrastructure in Gaza. So I think we need to think of not just aid, but solidarity, which is how we've been trying to think in Historians for Palestine as well, which is how can we support our colleagues, and how can we support those efforts that already exist, and thinking of ways to enable Palestinians to live up to that potential is not doing them a favor. It is something that is ensured and should be safeguarded under human rights and international law. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we move on to today's last speaker, who's Dr. Monica Rolfsen, Vice Chancellor from NTNU. She is a professor of Organization and Working Life Science, has previously served as a dean at the Faculty of Economics and Management, and was previously head of department at the Department of Industrial Economic and Technology Management. She is also the chair of NORPAL, and it is in this capacity she will now give her talk. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you for the invitation to talk about the NORPAL consortium here today. And also very glad that you're organizing this very timely and important event. It's really important. And I have been asked to share the interim NORPAL consortium, a task that I have humbly accepted. And when I'm not doing that, I work as a Vice Chancellor or Pro-Rector for Outreach and Social Responsibility at NTNU. NORPAL is a new consortium being established formally, hopefully in a couple of weeks. So far, NORPAL has not started activities or concrete engagement. So that's, Anne, the reason why you haven't heard much about it is that we haven't really... Yeah, in March, but we have an interim consortium, we haven't formally established. So what I can do is to talk about the motivation and the plans ahead. NORPAL is the Norwegian Consortium for Higher Education in Palestine. It's an initiative jointly from the University of Oslo and the Oslo Metropolitan University, Oslo Met, and Oddgeir, who is present today, who is one of the people who had this very good idea and took the initiative. But then I was asked to chair the consortium. The ambition is to gather Norwegian universities and colleges in a joint effort to support higher education in Palestine. And at this moment, we are about 15, 16 Norwegian universities and colleges who participate in a joint effort to support higher education in Palestine. But we're still working on the mandate for the consortium. We are, as I said, about 15, 16 who have agreed to be a part of the consortium, and several others are also considering to join us. The consortium also includes the National Union of Students in Norway, and it also includes the Norwegian Students and Academics International Assistance Fund, SIH. And they have so far accepted to have a secretary function, and we are very appreciate that. So why do we need such a consortium? There have been several reasons why the higher education institutions in Norway have decided to come together in this consortium. The first and foremost is that we have had a lot of dialogue with representatives from Palestine and Gaza, and they have all been very clear that there is a need for coordinated efforts. In this extreme situation, it's not possible for them to deal with initiatives from single institutions. They want us to, on a national level, be coordinated. Secondly, we experience strong engagement and desire to support colleagues and institutions in Palestine in many areas relevant to the rebuilding phase across Norwegian higher education institutions. So Nordpol's aim is to bring those individuals and environments together in Norway in specific task force building on a strong academic foundation. So we also need to have this strong collaboration in between us. And the third reason, Nordpol's ambition is to convince the Norwegian political level that higher education sector should be prioritized in the rebuilding. Convince them that higher education is of greatest importance for the long-term and sustainable development of Palestine. The Nordpol initiative is based on the continuous dialogue with representatives of higher education institutions in Palestine and in Gaza. And this is absolutely vital in the development of Nordpol. In the preparatory meetings leading up to the formal, or soon upcoming formal establishment of Nordpol, we had a meeting, as you heard of, in March at the University of Oslo. And we also had a meeting in this fall this year. And at all the meetings, we have had a strong dialogue with representatives from higher education in Palestine, and the situation of the university sector has been displayed, as we also have seen today. And that is important. In June, I participated in the FOBSU annual conference 2025 in London. FOBSU being Friends of Beachside University. At this conference, the topic of the conference was the emergency support for Palestinian higher education. So we also got a report on what is needed. And in this conference, the presidents of Al-Azhar University and Al-Aqsa University, and also the chairman and former president of Islamic University of Gaza, they were all present. So we got to meet them. I also got the opportunity to present Nordpol and get a response of the initiative. And it's very high interest in the United Kingdom, because they have been discussing to do something similar, but they haven't so far been able to do it. And I think one of the reasons, a very important part, is what we heard from Scotland, is this should be an arena for cooperation instead of competition. That is quite important. We just had a meeting in the steering group, still the interim group, on the 10th of October. And we also then had a representative from the emergency committee of University in Gaza and gave an update of the situation and the needs. So, to Nordpol, higher education and research is the focal point. In a situation that is extreme to the unimaginable, and where immediate survival can overshadow everything else, we keep the focus on higher education. This is in line with the dialogue with the higher education institutions in Palestine. It is about the importance of higher education and research for the development of Palestine and for the welfare of the Palestinian citizens. about higher education's role in supplying the Palestinian society with the competences and candidates, the skills needed for both the first acute phase in the rebuilding process, the immediate needs, and for a long-term and peaceful development of Palestine. And not least, it is very much about the importance of higher education and research for the identity and culture of the Palestinian population. We have been deeply impressed by the persistence of the higher education sector in Gaza during the war, the ability of the institutions to keep offering education digitally, and not least the students' and professors' ability to keep their focus on education in the midst of this extreme situation. So, what can Norwegian higher education institutions offer? What will be helpful? This is the number one question, and we also have a lot of initiatives and ideas here today. NORPAL was initiated in a period in March of cautious optimism during the ceasefire between January and March 2025. In this period, we were told that coordinated effort was welcomed by Palestine when so many wanted to help. After the end of the ceasefire, a little bit later in March, the ceasefire ended, as we know, and it was a long period of war going on until the 10th of October. In this period, our dialogue with higher education leaders revealed that donations to pay for student fees to keep the teaching going digitally was imperative. Now, after the new ceasefire, after 10th of October, the recognition of the higher education institutions in Palestine has been highlighted. And also the importance of education and research taking place in Palestine to strengthening of the Palestinian institutions rather than offering education in Norway. There is a fear that brain drain will happen when it is ever so important to keep competences, both professional and academic, in Palestine. So what is next for NORPAL? We are now in the process of identifying areas for task forces across the Norwegian higher education institutions on specific topics. There are very many researchers and groups at Norwegian universities that is now offering their competence and expertise to rebuild and strengthen the Palestinian higher education sector. We have strong groups with academics that are also practitioners in rebuilding societies after war and conflict. At NTNU, for example, a group in the Department of Architecture and Planning have a long-term experience from war and conflict zones. And one of our professors just received this medal from the Norwegian King just for achieving within this field of research. We can also offer help in the reconstruction of research facilities and laboratories for both education and research purposes. And we have a row of competence environments in areas like teacher education and healthcare, focusing on services in societies, or population groups after the traumas of war and conflict, if it is needed. As we just heard, that can be a discussion. So we hope that these groups that we have now putting together will have a real impact, because hope is what is needed. So, thank you.
So we now have a little bit of time for questions, reflections, comments from the audience.
Thank you very much. I'm Hege Hermansen, Oslo Met. I have two questions, and they both build on the insights from Toful and Anne. Thanks for very nice presentations. And I think one of the insights is really that, or takeaways, is that everyone can do something, right? Every single academic, and there are many of them in the room as well, can contribute in some way. So my question actually goes to the academy, and I was wondering how you plan to follow this up further, because I think it's very common in academia to say, well, we'll have a seminar. That's kind of how we function. That's our modus operandi. But I think the call for action that comes from Palestine and the Gaza and higher education sector goes far beyond that. So I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on follow-up. The other question goes to Monica. I think the other strong takeaway today is that our efforts need to be with Palestinians, not just because it's an ethical imperative, but because that's much more effective, right? That's how we get things done. So I was wondering how you work organizationally, structurally, to make sure that you integrate Palestinian stakeholders and Palestinian voices in the work moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'll answer first and then give the floor to Monica. We will do what we can, and I do agree with you that facilitating meetings, discussions as we do today is important, and our academy is just that. We have no research muscles or higher education muscles. We're a house. This is what we are, So, but we can do that. We can organize meetings, discussion, and facilitate. But we are also a membership organization, so we can offer researchers who are already here from Gaza guest membership, so they can be included in our discussions, etc. And to work with, I also have a university. Our members come from universities, so we can work as researchers, as educators, etc., to work with international solidarity with Gaza. I think that's what we can do.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So the initiatives come from, because we have listened to voices from Palestine. And in all the meetings we have included people from Palestine to tell us what is needed, how can we organize it. So that is the way we have been working all the time. And then there's a discussion within the consortium whether you should include representatives within the consortium, and that is a discussion between academic autonomy of the institutions and the need for help. So that is in the middle of what we are discussing right now in the mandate, but we will listen to and invite the Palestinian voices in all our meetings and in all the efforts.
Ahmed.
Sorry for being a bit rude about the time, but the reason why I'm asking is that I am afraid of these higher education. We have these amazing higher education systems that we have heard today. They're still working, like Asma. She is teaching, and that's happening also for the 2 medical schools, which I know the best. They are actually doing amazing work. They're graduating students in the midst of bombing, and but they are dependent on international accreditation. If they don't manage to prove that they're doing well, they will lose the accreditation. That is what they fear most now, both the 2 medical schools, and if they lose that, they will, that's so difficult to get again. And I guess that all the profession, that also goes for psychology and engineering, all kinds of practical-based teaching, that they depend on international accreditation. And there's so much politics in international accreditation systems. So that's why I'm impatient that, that's my biggest fear now, that because we totally depend on these institutions to continue doing their work. So what do you think? Is there any hope that it can go a bit faster now?
Just one more question, and then from the...
Thank you very much. My name is Abdullah, originated from Palestine, from Gaza. I work as associate professor at VID, specialized university. So I lived all my life in Gaza, but I live in Norway after my graduation here from the University of Oslo. Thank you for the initiative. I love the idea of having NORPAL. But I totally agree about the discussion right now, but I would ask you to include a number of Palestinians, academics and researchers living in Norway, because they can contribute to the culture and political sensitivity that the higher education in Palestine have. So please do that. Include some of us who have a good experience and can provide you of knowledge about the culture and political sensitivity in the country. Thank you.
So, Monica, did you want to reply and then?
Yes, we absolutely want to include Palestinians living in Norway. The meeting we had in Oslo, we had several people from both the University of Oslo and Oslo Met who are scholars at risk and other positions, so we will absolutely want to do that. When it comes to the speed, I'm impatient too, but the problem is that if you want to have all 16 or even 20 different institutions, there are several interests and a little bit of politics and discussions, so we are working on it. And my hope is during a couple of weeks, we will probably have a mandate for the consortium and can start working in groups with what can we do with healthcare, engineering, rebuilding, and so on, and coordinate between the institutions. But it's a discussion on each individual institution's autonomy, and on the other hand, to delegate some decisions to the consortium. So that is, it's not easy. And actually in the United Kingdom, they have tried to do something similar, but they have not succeeded. So they're looking upon us that we have come very far. Even if we haven't, in my opinion, we haven't been able to start, but we will start pretty soon, I hope.
Too full.
Hello? Yes? Okay. Yeah, I was... thank you, Ustaz Abdullah. I was thinking exactly about this really delicate balance between bringing people over and supporting them at home, and the dangers of brain drain at a very critical time. But I think this proposal specifically, and not just Palestinians outside of Palestine, but also Palestinians between the West Bank and Gaza again, but Palestinians with each other to try and work on enabling the synergy between them rather than create a system where they are dependent on someone else helping them, right? Because they've done this before. They've actually done this before. It was all squandered away by the Oslo Accords, unfortunately, but they had actually developed a transnational network of support, cultural, educational, political, and I think it's important to think in these terms when we're thinking about education in Palestine, even today.
So we have two more questions. I ask you to do them all in one, and then we'll leave 10 seconds for answers from our speakers.
So it's more a brief comment. Let's say, so you have these descriptions that Anne gave and Tuful gave about people acting quickly and swiftly, and also using the instruments that they have, and then the situation that I'm understanding that Monica is in when it comes to the consortium. And there's a concept in Europe now, there's this coalition of the willing. So perhaps this is the time when people can understand the responsibility in the situation we are differently, and there are different ways of understanding it and taking it. But I think what we need as in cooperation with people in leadership positions and the people lots of people working at the local level in cooperation with people in Gaza, it's the coalition of the willing. So that's my sort of the suggestion also for Monica's endeavors to get these things through. Thank you.
Andreas Follostal, a philosopher at the University of Oslo. Thanks for stimulating presentations now and before the break. I wanted to follow up the previous comment. One of the challenges seems to be how to move forward and avoid unnecessary conflicts between institutions and so forth. And it seems one constructive suggestion is to focus perhaps more on facilitate collaboration between individuals. Scholars who would want to exchange and so forth. There's some experience on that. One of the challenges that I'm still puzzling about myself, it's not a rhetorical question in that sense. How can the institutions serving as clearinghouses and so forth avoid unnecessary conflicts even about terminologies? My own experience is it's almost impossible to get collaboration between people who either insist the word colonialism needs to be part of the written documents, and those who say, well, if colonialism is mentioned, I don't want to get into that, so I'm not going to participate. Which of these conflicts can be avoided, and which are somehow necessary either for integrity, as was pointed out, or for strategic purposes?
Very quick reflections from the speakers, if you want.
Yeah, I can start. This is another of the very complicated issues, is the decolonial perspective. And our role in this consortium is to coordinate what can be helpful from the Norwegian perspective. We're not going to tell what is needed in Palestine. That was up to Palestine themselves. But if they need this and that, we can coordinate the effort from the different institutions in Norway. So we're not going to define what is needed, but we can help in whatever that might be. But that is also a conflict because it can, somebody will be more interested in helping defining it, but that is one of the things we're working on in the mandate. So our role is, as universities, we're not going to be politicians, but we're quite good in higher education and research. So that is what we're going to deliver in a coordinated way.
I think that one of the reasons why Historians for Palestine got such incredible input now was the flat language that was deliberate. And it was just, documenting. But we also used colonial, enabling occupation, these kinds of things, but it was, and I think that's an advantage we have as academics. So that was one thing. The other was, but without flattening it out so we don't describe what's happening on the ground. The other thing I wanted to say was about, Andreas, your comment about the individual collaboration, because one of the problems that academics and institutions now have is there's a lot of people writing to them and offering their help, but without actually knowing what they need. So it's actually an organization like Nordpol is so much needed because they can work institutionally and then they can give the help that's needed. So I actually don't think that more individual to individual collaboration. It's happening already and really great, but Nordpol is needed so much also for these institutions to survive.
Comment to Monica and then...
Yeah, very, very short. I forgot to mention that, but because what Nordpol is trying to offer is to bring these individuals together within specific task forces, within healthcare, whatever, we can bring people together in the task force, but we're just helping out on an institutional level.
Yes, I think, thank you. I think this is a very important question, and it comes up constantly, what terminologies to use. And I think as researchers, we can talk about the advantages and disadvantages of using a term such as settler colonialism and how it helps and whatsoever. But I think when it comes to official bureaucratic level, at the level, for example, at Nordpol, there is a clear anchoring in international law and human rights. And these have been the demands of Palestinians for decades now. And I think approaching it from this angle not only clarifies what is on the ground, which is, of course, important, but also talks to Palestinians. I mean, it talks to the demands that Palestinians have been putting forth.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Excuse me, can online.
Oh, online, yes, please. Sorry.
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
Yeah, I would like just to thank you for all your brilliant input and efforts. But yeah, again, I would like to stress very important principle here, maybe the colleagues were talking about. I know that some would just look at this terminology like settler colonialism as a sensitive issue, but it is a reality. And understanding the context and expressing the context as it is essential actually to form and guide the support needed. Because this is not a normal conflict. This is a settler colonialism project trying to expel the people from their land, steal not only their land, but even their collective knowledge and culture. which is related to the education system. So this is the first thing. Another thing, we need actually to understand and respect the institutional framework of higher education system in Palestine. When we talk about accreditation of the system, when we talk about even the priorities of the system, this is actually should be defined by the existing institutions that are affiliated by the Ministry of Higher Education in Palestine, which is internationally acknowledged, authority or state. The third issue, we are really in now with this ceasefire and the peace plan of Trump, we need to think about very important threat that is currently actually a big concern for us as a Palestinian. They are trying actually to present a different model of a colonial project, where actually even internationally, like player Trump is trying actually to establish this new governance system. But what is most threatening for us as education sector, they are trying to colonize our education system. So their intention, actually, I don't know if you have ever heard about this, but this is also very important to mention. There is a project called Gaza University of Reconstruction that is actually an American project, is designed to substitute the existing and it's coming as, kind of a good intention. The universities in Gaza are destroyed, there is nothing remaining there. And, they have those destructive values. And we are going to bring a new university with the new values. Yeah. And therefore here, it's very important as a principle for whomever is willing actually to provide support. We need to support the existing national universities that preserve the national identity and national culture and the collective knowledge of the Palestinian people. And therefore, it is very important to reflect that this is really a unique context that we need to understand before even designing our interventions. Thank you.
And with that important last call, we now end today's meeting. There is lunch for everyone outside, but let's give a hand to all the speakers today. And let's continue this conversation both informally and formally.